Hello and welcome to Focus on Israel and the Palestinian Territories. My name is Paul Calvert. Numbers 14 verse 8 from the New King James Bible says this: "If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey." I'm with Naomi Kahn from Regavim. Now Naomi, what is Regavim?
Regavim is an Israeli non-government organization. It was established in 2006, and we are dedicated to preserving Israel's resources. First and foremost is the most basic and the most contested and the most valuable resource, and that is the land itself. So we have become recognized experts in everything that has to do with preservation of Israel's land resources against all sorts of violations. Illegal construction and illegal use in general, the legal status of the land, how best to preserve Israel's land reserves for future generations, and how to make good policy decisions having to do with the use of Israel's land resources.
And who is committing these violations?
Well, unfortunately, everybody. What we have focused on is the lack of parity, the lack of universal enforcement against land use violations because of the political situation in Israel. So, for example, there's massive illegal construction in the north of the country that has gone unaddressed because it's carried out in certain communities, the Druze community and the Arab sector in the north of the country. In the south, we have a different reality, but the same situation on the ground, and that is that Israeli Bedouin who have land claims, and those claims have never been resolved. That's causing massive waste of Israel's only available land reserves. 80% of Israel's available land for development and growth is in the Negev, and the Negev is being swallowed up by illegal construction, and there's no effective enforcement. There's actually no Israeli policy that is addressing that. So we've been battling the lack of policy and the lack of enforcement for over a decade down in the south. In other areas of the country, you have different expressions of essentially the Israeli government failing to exercise its sovereignty and the loss of sovereignty expressed through the loss of land.
Does this bring further difficulties? I imagine if someone's built illegally and Israel wants to knock a building down, then it makes Israel look like the bad guy.
Well, unfortunately, Israel's opponents are using that as a tool. They're doing it purposely. So, for example, we've been tracking a phenomenon for the past few years where the Palestinian Authority uses European funding and takes advantage of European political protection and diplomatic protection by building schools in areas where there are no communities, using these schools as a public relations ploy, because if Israel knocks down an illegally built school, it looks terrible. You're denying underprivileged children an education. But essentially, they're using these schools to take control of territory and to build illegal communities around them. So, yes, it's a very, very bad public relations black eye when Israel...
So they're actually building on territory that doesn't belong to them in the first place?
Absolutely. They're building... We know of over 50 schools with demolition orders built illegally. The Palestinian Authority calls them confrontation schools. They build them in areas that are highly strategically important, and they use them to take control of the territory, knowing that it will look really, really bad for Israel if they knock down a school that was funded by the European Union or a European government or European humanitarian NGOs. But the truth of the matter is that these schools were built only for political purposes, to take control of territory in areas under Israeli jurisdiction.
Doesn't the European Union see that they're being used in this way?
I think the European Union is complicit. The European Union says loudly, clearly, and over the course of years that they support Palestinian statehood. What they don't realize is that undermining the Oslo Accords, which is international law since nothing else has superseded it, undermining these agreements and creating facts on the ground in support of Palestinian statehood is essentially encouraging the Palestinians not to negotiate, and is creating a situation on the ground that becomes so complex that you can't reach a negotiated resolution for territorial division, because they're creating an intertwined mess that will be impossible to divide cleanly. So the European Union is being used, it is using them, and it is up to its neck in politics. It's violating its own charter, it's violating the agreements to which it is a signatory, and it's violating what we call customary international law and the Geneva Conventions by undermining Israeli sovereignty and ignoring the jurisdiction of the Israeli civil administration in these areas. So we've been trying to fight against that, and we're about to launch a major campaign against these illegal schools in particular.
Is there a lot of empty land around?
There isn't a lot of land, period. Israel's a very, very small country. When we talk in terms of international concepts of space, I think it's very, very hard for people who've never been in Israel to realize how small it is, to understand really what the proximity is. I, for example, live in a community that is equidistant between Jerusalem and Ramallah, but I can walk practically to either one in an hour and a half, an hour. So an hour's walk in either direction, and I'm either in Ramallah or Jerusalem. It's a very, very small country. Area C, it's really small. All of Judea and Samaria, which is the most hotly contested and politicized of all of these issues. And 40% of that is under Palestinian Authority jurisdiction, and 60% of that 40% is completely empty and available for construction. But the Palestinian Authority is using European money not to develop those areas, but to take over areas that were placed under Israeli jurisdiction. So it's a game. It's all called humanitarian aid, but it's creating humanitarian hardship, and it is all politically motivated.
So I guess if someone loses their house, they feel really angry against Israel, and it creates more bitterness, and the European Union is encouraging this hatred.
Yes, the European Union is fueling the flames of conflict here and is creating situations where people are suffering. They're using the most vulnerable populations as pawns. They are using the most easily manipulated people to take over territory. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for both sides. It's more of a tragedy for the people who are stuck in between the rock and the hard place.
So what do you do as an organization to counteract things like this?
Well, the first thing we do is that we actually investigate what's out there on the ground, what's happening, who's doing what, who's building what, by what authority, where the money's coming from. More or less seeing how the map is changing. The map that's supposed to be static and under negotiation. There unfortunately haven't been negotiations in many years. But what's actually happening out on the ground? Nobody else is really paying attention to that. So we, for example, mapped out how many illegal structures were built in Judea and Samaria, how many illegal structures were built in the Negev, where these people are supposed to be living and why they're not there, where the land ownership claims in the Negev are, and how do you resolve them? How do you build new modern communities to give these people all the access to modern conveniences that every citizen in the 21st century should have? Running water, electricity, education, healthcare. All of these things are being denied these people because the government is afraid to establish a policy and enforce the law. So that's in the Negev. And in Judea and Samaria, we've mapped out 60,000 illegal structures built in Area C in strategic locations. We've mapped out how that would affect, for example, the Trump peace plan. When you base a peace vision on dividing the territory, but that division the map that you create doesn't reflect the actual facts on the ground. Where are buildings? Who's built where? What are these corridors for transportation actually empty? All of these things are not theoretical. There are real live people who are living there. They've been sent to live there on purpose in order to undermine the possibility of a negotiated solution. So we map this all out, we investigate what's being done out on the ground, and we present our findings both to policymakers, to legislators, and to municipal authorities or local authorities that are responsible for enforcing the law, and try to get them to actually enforce the existing law in places where the law is inadequate or is not giving an adequate response to what's actually being done. We recommend policy changes. We try to lobby for changes in legislation based on what we actually find is happening out in the field.
Now, there's only one Jewish state, so this is very important work, isn't it?
Yes, I believe it is very important. It's important for the future of the Jewish state and the Jewish people, and I think it's also important in general because it's a very small, singular place, but it is at the focal point, I think, of world events in so many ways. The future and the peace and prosperity and progress of the entire Middle East really depends on this. As we've seen recently, it takes bold moves to actually circumvent these problems and try to make any progress whatsoever. We want these issues to be resolved peacefully, and we want them to be resolved so that there is a better future for our children and for the children of the entire region.
Is there agricultural crime as well?
Absolutely. So one of the tactics that's being used to take over land is the exploitation of a loophole in the law. The law that's in force in Judea and Samaria is, believe it or not, Ottoman land law, which was abolished everywhere else in the world 100 years ago because it's so anachronistic, it's outdated, has things about it that simply don't jibe with modern sensibilities. For example, women aren't allowed to own property, or they're not allowed to inherit or to bequeath property. If you use a piece of land, even if it's not yours, you can claim rights to it. It encourages all sorts of behaviors that the modern world cannot live with. So this is the law that is in force in Judea and Samaria, and it's the law that is being enforced by Israel's courts. And one of the strangest parts of the law is this issue of squatting, that if you take a piece of land and use it for agricultural purposes for a certain amount of time and no one objects, then it becomes yours. You can claim rights to it. So there's a massive program of agricultural land seizure initiated by the Palestinian Authority and funded by a host of European governments and NGOs that is taking over hundreds of thousands of acres of land in Judea and Samaria simply by planting on it. And the Israeli authorities have not addressed this problem. They've turned a blind eye to it simply because you get very, very bad press when you uproot trees or you make an issue out of something that seems so benign as local farmers, subsistence farmers, things like that. But it's anything but innocent. The Europeans are paying Palestinians to move out to these areas and to plant in them and stay in them in order to gain control of them. So the map of Area C is actually changing constantly without negotiation, simply by land grabs through either illegal construction or agricultural use.
So when you read in the newspaper or see on Facebook that Israel has destroyed a lot of trees, there's actually more to that story than meets the eye.
Yes, there's a lot more to the story than meets the eye. You'll find agricultural work, all kinds of strange things in strange areas, desert areas that were considered even 150 years ago by the Ottoman Empire were considered mawat, meaning dead. Impossible to grow anything there, desert areas. And you find now all of a sudden massive European-funded water systems that are bringing water out to these desert areas and strange things that are being planted there simply because they grow quickly. They're destroying the ecosystem. They are draining resources, but they're politically motivated. They're there simply because the Palestinian Authority has targeted these areas for takeover. So there's a lot more to those stories than meets the eye, unfortunately.
Do you lobby Parliament?
We work very, very closely we lobby Parliament actively and constantly. As a matter of fact, in a half an hour's time, I'm supposed to be taking part in a Knesset debate on crime in the Arab sector in the Negev. We lobby Parliament on all sorts of issues, on land use issues, on sovereignty issues, on law enforcement issues, on quality of life issues, on sovereignty, all the things that we deal with. Also, we're very, very active in environmental issues. Because we spend so much time out in the field investigating, we come across a lot of abuse of Israel's natural resources, and we're very, very involved in that area. We also have now spun off a project which we were very involved in for many years, trying to preserve archaeological sites of World Heritage importance, the sites of importance for the history of Christianity, Judaism, all through Judea and Samaria. There are thousands of sites that are under attack and are being erased by the Palestinian Authority purposely. They're rewriting history on the ground, and we've tried to take an active role in lobbying Parliament to protect these sites. We created a national plan to protect these sites, and the arm of Regavim that was dealing with archaeological preservation has now spun off into an independent NGO, and will be pursuing those issues very, very actively with legislators, formulating policy and enforcement guidelines.
And just recently, Regavim was part of a field tour of Gush Etzion. Tell us a little bit about that.
So in the Knesset, there's a Land of Israel caucus, members of Knesset who came together around this particular issue. They went out to investigate the situation on the ground to see, now that the sovereignty issue has essentially been taken off the table for the time being, we hope not permanently, but they wanted to investigate what the situation is on the ground and what could be done to help improve the quality of life of people in the Jewish communities out in Judea and Samaria that are either not recognized or have not finished the process of recognition and registration. So they called upon us as experts in land use issues and as the organization that essentially forced the issue of the takeover of Area C on the part of the Palestinian Authority onto the national agenda. They asked us to come and present some of our findings out in the field and to show areas that have been targeted by the Palestinian Authority for takeover and how that looks on the ground, how that is the mechanics of how the Palestinian Authority takes over territory that is under Israeli jurisdiction. We did that. It was very, very interesting. It was gratifying to see that there was a very good turnout of members of Knesset from a number of parties. There were ultra-Orthodox members of Knesset from Shas, from the United Torah Judaism. There were members of the Likud, members of the Yamina Party, blue and white, all came out to see for themselves out on the ground exactly this example in Gush Etzion of how the battleground for control of the open spaces in Judea and Samaria looks.
Is Israel's claim to land a biblical claim?
It starts with a biblical claim. In my opinion, everything starts with a biblical claim. All of us are here because of biblical claims. So it starts there, but it has, over the years, gained many other claims that support that biblical claim, that are based on it in one way or another. International law recognizes Israel's, no matter what you read in the press about Israel being in violation of the law, doing things illegally, this is not actually the case. It's a mantra that's been repeated enough times, and unfortunately people don't look into it carefully enough. We have, in Regavim, one section of what we do is we have our own research, essentially a think tank, to examine the legal situation in terms of international law and the development of international law over the past 100 years, even more, 150 years, the development of international law as regards Israel's rights in the land of Israel. And we've written extensively on it. We presented some of the articles in a recent volume, which we translated into English. We presented to the American political section of the American Embassy, the State Department, members of the European Parliament, for their consideration to actually read what international law says about Israel's rights to the land of Israel. It was quite eye-opening for many of them. After we published this information, the United States government actually changed its policy, canceled the Hansel Memorandum that brought Israel's legal rights into question in Judea and Samaria, and announced the Pompeo Doctrine, it's now called, recognizing Israel's legal rights in Judea and Samaria. So I think that part of that aspect of our work is very, very important. We are presently going just before launch. Hopefully, as soon as the corona crisis is over, we will have a massive launch of another volume that examines the underpinnings, the legal underpinnings of the BDS movement, essentially, more or less. Everything having to do with trade and Israel's rights in the land of Israel. So that is another aspect of what we do. We look at the legal and theoretical underpinnings of what we see out in the field, and we call the paradigms into question, and sometimes we recommend paradigm shifts. But in this case, international law, customary law, the Geneva Conventions, the Oslo Accords, all of these things support a very, very different reality than what we're seeing out on the ground, and the claims that Israel is in violation of international law simply don't hold water when you examine them.
What's your prayer for the future?
My prayer is like everyone else's prayer. We want a peaceful resolution that will enable us to build a better, stronger, healthier, more harmonious future for our children and grandchildren. My ancestors would have given anything, my grandparents would have given anything to have the merit of what I have myself, and that I can live in the Holy Land and build my future here and raise my children here, protect this land and build something better for the future, something that allows me to express my values as a God-fearing Jew, or as a Jew in any way. But that always means that there's room for others who want to live peacefully and in holiness and in harmony. That's what we're struggling to achieve here.
You have a Facebook page for people who'd like to know more. What's your Facebook page?
We have a very, very active Facebook page in English. It's called Regavim, Regavim. We have a website. We're actually just running now a beta for an all-new revamped website, so hopefully that will be up in the next few days. We're also on Twitter and on Instagram, but our Facebook page is really the place where we daily, at least once a day, sometimes twice a day, update our followers, and we have thousands of them, and welcome more. We update them on events out in the field, on issues that are coming up, on successes, on things that need more attention, sometimes calls to action, letter writing campaigns, cases that are coming up in the court. And it's also a forum for civilized discussion and debate. We don't censor out dissenting opinions. We welcome respectful conversation, and our Facebook page is a very, very active forum for that sort of thing. So look for us.
Okay, Naomi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you'd like to know more about our show, you can join us on Facebook. Just look for Focus on Israel-Radio. Ezekiel 37 verse 4-6 says this, "Again he said to me, prophesy to these bones, and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God of these bones, surely I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. I will put sinners on you, and bring flesh upon you, cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live. Then you shall know that I am the Lord, and the Jews will receive the real shalom peace."